Howell Estes, the Director of Operations for the Joint Staff, is here to give you a briefing on the search and rescue effort. General Estes.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is obviously not a very pleasant experience or time for any of us to be able to have to get up and talk about such a tragic accident as happened today with Secretary Brown's aircraft. What I want to do for you today, since there have been a lot of rumors out there and a lot of speculation about what occurred, is to try to give you the facts as we know them. Now, needless to say, this happened in a very remote area in terms of the location of U.S. people and support that can be provided if something happened like this tragic accident. And so the flow of information has been a little difficult, but the worst thing that I can do for you all today is to get up and not state what we know as fact. And so I will try to stick to that. And to do that, I'm going to use some notes and a few charts so that I accurately depict the information that we have available at this time. Secretary Brown's aircraft was scheduled to take off from Tuzla in Bosnia at about 7 o'clock Eastern Time this morning and proceed on a route of flight down to Dubrovnik in Croatia for landing. It was about a 45-minute flight, so they should have been on the ground there at about 7:45 to 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time this morning. The weather down at Dubrovnik this morning was not very good, and so as the aircraft proceeded to the south, they were required to make what we call an instrument approach into the airfield. The aircraft was on the instrument approach, was in contact with a tower at the Dubrovnik airport when contact was lost. Initial reports that we received and that we received in Europe were that there was wreckage sighted in the waters of the Adriatic. A search and rescue mission was launched initially from the U.S. involving U.S. Special Forces, which the closest place we had people that could respond to this were Italy with the kinds of equipment necessary. They were over at Brindisi, Italy, but we deployed what we call an MC-130 aircraft. It's a Special Forces kind of an aircraft, a 4-engine propeller-driven aircraft, and helicopters. The MH-53 helicopter, a fairly large helicopter used by Special Forces, and they were conducting the search and rescue. They initially concentrated, I should also add, helicopters from other nations were involved as well, not just U.S. in this initial search. All of these aircraft initially concentrated on the areas that were initially reported, which were that there was wreckage at sea. No wreckage was found at sea by any of the search and rescue assets. About 3 hours into the search, and you've got to remember now, the weather is bad, reasonably bad, requiring an instrument approach. So as I will show you in a minute, there are, in fact, some hills in the area around the airport to the north side of the runway, a reasonable amount of distance, but nevertheless there. And the fact is that we had some reports from the Croatians that they had found a crash site up on the side of the hill, covered by the clouds. So it was obviously not easy to see, not easy to determine that there was in fact a crash site there, but they initially reported a crash site of an aircraft about 3 kilometers to the north of the western end of the runway. The crash site has been reached by Croatian police, and I've just received word that there's also a Croatian doctor on the scene. U.S. forces are striving to get to the scene. In fact, at this minute, may be at the scene. There are helicopters on the ground at Dubrovnik's airport, U.S. helicopters that held about 50 U.S. personnel. Initially, they made an attempt to land at the crash site, but because of the weather, were unable to do that. And so they are, as rapidly as possible, working their way up to where the crash site is. This is important because there have been unconfirmed by anybody in the U.S. side reports that there have been some casualties on the ground, obviously, but there are unconfirmed, and I want to stress, unconfirmed reports of a survivor on the ground. And so it's extremely important that every effort be made to to get help up to the scene. And that's why I go through this about who is there now. We're being told that there is a Croatian doctor there, and these U.S. personnel, of which we have some people with medical experience, although not doctors at this stage of the game, also headed up there to provide whatever assistance they can to the Croatians. Obviously, the Croatian government has asked for assistance in the search and rescue. As I mentioned, we already have forces on the ground. The U.S. on-scene commander is a Brigadier General Mike Canavan. He is physically present at the airport now. There is a team being assembled up at Tuzla in Bosnia to provide additional assistance as required. And the normal things when you have an aircraft accident of this time, such as communications, security, public affairs, and mortuary affairs, people are going to be brought down initially to Split in Croatia and then drive down to the crash site. They're going to Split instead of Dubrovnik. At least initial reports are they're going to do that because they want to be sure they can get in with the weather situation the way it is. I might also point out that an accident board has been appointed by the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. The accident board president will be Brigadier General Charlie Coolidge. He is presently here in the United States. Will leave the U.S. tonight for Croatia. The National Transportation Safety Board has also agreed to provide assistance in this accident investigation. Initially, 4 members of the NTSB will be with the Air Force team and serve as advisors. I think it's important to point out at this point there is no evidence of any hostile fire in the area. There is no evidence of any kind of an explosion aboard the aircraft. I think at this point, because of the location, we would rule anything out of that type. Obviously, General Coolidge and his team will do everything humanly possible to determine the cause of this accident, and will make a full report. One thing I think it's also worth mentioning in terms of the manifest, I know there is concern for numbers of people aboard, families obviously very concerned, and we here in the Defense Department have made every effort to try to confirm the people who were aboard the aircraft. The report that we have is that there were 33 people aboard, 27 passengers and a crew of 6. I think with that as an opening, I will turn to these slides again and try to give you a little more definition. Give you a little more definition on the crash site itself as it's being told to us by the Croatians. I don't know if you can see that with the cameras in the back. Let me turn this just a little bit more, and maybe that'd be of help. This is a rendition of what the area around Dubrovnik looks like with the Adriatic Sea out here. City of Dubrovnik shown in this area. The airport itself is located on this piece of land. You can see the runway here. The crash site is up on this hillside that you see here. Why don't I get through this and then we'll take questions, okay? Next slide, please. I'll show you one other view of it. Go ahead, I've got it. This is now looking out from the water. You can see the runway structure here. This being the west end of the runway, headed east. And the crash site that is now being approached is up here on this hill. This hill is about 2,300 feet tall to the west, and to the north side of the airport about 3 miles. 2,300 feet.
How many miles, I'm sorry?
It's about, I said 3 miles, it's 3 kilometers. 3 kilometers, about 1.8 miles to the north-northwest. One other slide to talk a little bit about the aircraft itself. The aircraft is what the Air Force calls a T-43 aircraft. Many of you will recognize this as a Boeing 737, very similar to the commercial version. Some of the specifics: the aircraft is located at Ramstein Air Force Base. That's where it is based. I've already told you the size of the crew, and there are just some other facts about it here that talk to its range and its speed and so forth. But this is an aircraft very familiar to all of you and to those watching on television, in that it's a commercial airliner used for a long period of time in this country with a very, very good safety record. As I mentioned, General Coolidge will be doing the accident investigation, and when he determines the facts surrounding this accident, he will report them to the proper authorities that he is to report to. I can only say that here in the Defense Department, in the Joint Staff, in the Air Force, throughout this building, there's a great amount of concern for the individuals who are aboard the aircraft, obviously their families, and we are doing everything we can here to assist the Croatians as they carry out the actions that need to be taken at the crash site. We can only hope that the reports of survivors are true and that more are found, and we will be making information available to you as it becomes available to us. If I could start here.
General, do you have any reports of confirmed fatalities? You told us of the unconfirmed reported
We have
survivors.
no confirmed reports of either fatalities or survivors. I can only put it that way because I have unconfirmed reports of some fatalities and one survivor, unconfirmed. Yes, sir.
General, a lot of questions dealing with the same thing, and forgive me for getting a little technical for some of my brethren here, but going through the approach for a moment, I'm interested in length of runway. Was there ILS there? Was he on the approach and veered off? Was he landing to the east or west? Mm-hmm. Was there a black box aboard? Was there a wind shear detector aboard? Any evidence of wind shear in the area? Things of that.
Yeah. Well, I think many of the questions you're asking really need to come out in the accident investigation. But in general terms, I do know that the airport was serviced by a radio beacon. That was what was being used for the approach. It is a well-known system for doing instrument approaches. The runway length was not a problem. They've got plenty of runway there. The runway direction is in a heading of 300 to the northwest and to the southeast on 120. They were landing to the southeast, so they were coming from west to east. And from the slide I showed you earlier, let's just put that back up, the one with the water view. No, the other one.
That's the question. Was it sort of on the approach when he went in, or after he veered off, or had gone past the airfield, or can you tell?
1 minute. Let's get this up so everybody can see what I'm going to describe here. Here is the runway structure out here. The aircraft approach would have been from this direction. Okay, we're heading now, we're to the west side toward Dubrovnik. We're heading to the southeast and landing in the direction of 120. Okay? So they would have approached over water here and come in on about a heading like that in the approach.
General, there were reports that a senior general was on board. Is that the case, and who was that?
Again, it's difficult for me to confirm or deny these reports at this point in time. When we have information that confirms who was on the aircraft, as the rescue teams get to the crash site and make that determination, it'll be made available to you, I'm sure. I don't have any information for it.
From the aircraft about distress or anything?
No, I think that's an important point, Carl. There were no calls made indicating any kind of a problem aboard the aircraft. It appeared to be a routine approach from what I know at this point in time.
At what point did you lose contact with the aircraft? When did you look? Where were they in the approach?
Yeah. Again, I can't tell you that. I don't have the information. I know that they were in contact with the tower, making their approach when contact was lost. I can't tell you in what phase they were in because we don't know that at this point in time.
And do you have any idea what the
Let me go over here to
timetable
Mark.
is for the Americans to get up to the site?
Well, as I said, and I just was handed a note, let me, This just says General Canavan is there. I've already told you he's there on the ground. They couldn't get in by helicopter. They're proceeding up now afoot. And I can't give you an exact time they're going to reach the crash site. They could be there at this very minute. I just don't have that kind of contact with them since I've come down here. I can't tell you where they are right this minute. But let me just make it very clear that these people understand what they're supposed to be doing, and they're making every effort to get there as quickly as possible if they are not at the crash site as we speak.
And as far as you know, are the nav aides at the airport, were they working? I understand there's 2 radio beacons there. Were they both working, as far as you know?
I haven't been given any information on that, so it's improper for me to speculate if they were working or not working. We do know that a series of 2 or 3 aircraft landed in the half hour prior to this aircraft, indicating that everything was okay. But at the moment this aircraft was making an approach, I can't tell you what the status of the nav aids was because I don't know. We don't have a specific ceiling and visibility. I've asked for that, but we know it was sufficiently cloud covered to force them to fly an instrument approach. I can't tell you that.
General, are your aircraft on missions like this under any different weather-related flight restrictions than what we would typically see from commercial aircraft or other routine operations?
No, the Air Force has set minimums for aircraft that fly. Different aircraft have different kinds of minimums, and we have approach plates, the Air Force does, that, and in fact, all military aircraft use these approach plates. And your aircraft is given a certain category. And for each category, the weather minimums may be different depending on the kind of aircraft.
Yes, my question is, are your Air Force minimums any different than those that would typically apply in commercial air service?
No, not for this kind of an aircraft. They wouldn't be any different. In other words, you're asking me would they be lower? The answer would be no.
Lower, higher?
They could be higher, but they wouldn't be lower than the published minimums for the approach used by civilian aircraft.
General, there's a rumor that there was a suggestion that this flight be grounded and that the order was overruled and it went anyway.
You're dealing with a rumor again. I can't speculate. I have not heard that. It will be looked at by the accident board as part of their investigation. Yes,
General
ma'am.
Estes, you said earlier, if I understood right, that U.S. helicopters tried to land at the crash site, but they couldn't.
That's right.
And so essentially now, if General Canavan's team is arriving, this is the first time that U.S. personnel are arriving at the crash site?
At the crash site itself, that's right. Now, remember, what I've described is General Canavan is at the airport, okay? And that's what we're talking about down here. The distance they have to travel is up to where the crash site is. We're talking going through very rough terrain, and there are no roads to where the crash site is. So they're having to work their way up there. Weather is still not good up here. It's cloud covered. In fact, right down on the top of the mountain. So it will take them some time to get there. But there are people on the scene, and as I described to you earlier, for all I know, they may be at the scene by now.
General, why the problem with the...
Let me go back here first.
General, the civilian aviation charts for this area indicate that the only instrument approach is either basically straight from Dubrovnik into the airport, right, or looping even farther to the south. Is there any indication from the controllers who were talking to these guys in the air why they were apparently so far off of any instrument approach course?
Yeah, no, I can't answer that question for you. What you're describing is that there are 2 approaches. There is a straight-in approach like this, or a circling approach that would take you out this direction away from the mountains. And those are 2 kinds of approaches off the same kind of an instrument landing that would be done using the instrumentation available at the airport. I can't tell you why they were where they were, nor am I in a position to speculate. That's exactly what General Coolidge and the accident board will attempt to determine.
Well, if I can just follow up, sir, were there any reasons why for security approaches that they would take a non-standard approach?
Absolutely not. No, I mean I can't imagine when these aircraft, we in the Air Force would fly it like you would fly a commercial airliner. I mean, it wouldn't be any different. It would be unthinkable that they would be flying an approach different than what was published. What would they be flying? They have to be flying the published approach. So we don't even need to speculate on that. They wouldn't be doing something non-standard to get into the airport.
But are you saying but they were off, are you saying though that you think they were off that course?
I haven't a clue why they ended up here.
You think they were?
Well, what I'm telling you is they were on approach to this runway. The aircraft impacted on the hill here. The accident board will determine why this chain of events happened. That's all I can tell you. Yes,
When did Secretary Brown get to Tuzla
And two, have you gotten a manifest from Tuzla?
What I'm going to do on this is I'm going to stick to the operational details, the specifics of when Secretary Brown arrived at Tuzla. The manifest issue will have to be dealt with by the State Department, and I think they're prepared to address that later.
General, was there
Let me go back here where I haven't had a question.
this essentially is a dedicated passenger jet for USAF. Do you have a sense in the last month how often it flew? They must not have much demand there for a plane this large ferrying people around. What about crew proficiency? How come this wasn't the 89th?
Yeah. Well, this is an airplane which is used extensively in Europe. I'm very familiar with the utilization of the aircraft. There are teams that move around. It supports not just Air Force, but other people as well. So it gets good utilization. In fact, this particular aircraft had about 17,000 flying hours. That particular aircraft did. It had, in terms of 737s of a similar age, they're up to between 30 and 50,000 hours. So it wasn't a high-time aircraft. Airplane had been through a full inspection, full maintenance inspection in June of '95. A total maintenance inspection, has had a series of them since then. But the aircraft's been used in Europe routinely, and this is not an issue of crew, I do not believe. Okay, now this is, again, I promised I wouldn't speculate, but knowing how these aircraft are operated, I can't believe that that lack of flying would be a problem with this aircraft.
Can you explain why it isn't the 89th? The people who think that high officials always fly with the 89th SAM out of Andrews, how come they weren't involved here and it was a USAF asset?
Yeah, I can't tell you why that's the case. The 89th does the long-distance haul for dignitaries of Secretary Brown, like Secretary Brown, a cabinet member, and a party that he had with him. But in terms of making the shorter flights that they are making into places like Tuzla and some of the other stops they were making, it was obviously determined this was a better aircraft to do it with. Yes, sir.
Any information as to whether this crew had flown into Dubrovnik prior to this flight?
I'm sorry, sir, I can't give you the answer.
General,
to that
what
question.
direction was the plane?
Do we know estimated time of impact to the estimated time of when the first Croatian, whoever that might have been, arrived? Do you know?
Again, I don't have the specifics of that yet. We will get that, but we just, we're talking an awful long distance away. I wish I could tell you exactly what happened and what the sequence of events were in terms of people arriving on the scene. The information just is not available yet. And right now, our primary concern is getting rescue people up there to assist any survivors.
General, was this plane carrying a flight data recorder or a cockpit voice recorder that will help you figure out what happened?
Yeah, it'd be a standard thing to have that in this type of an aircraft. I think you can assume that sort of thing, a flight data recorder, a cockpit voice recorder, as there are in commercial airliners, also is in this aircraft.
A ground proximity warning system, was that on?
I can't tell you that for sure, whether or not.
Direction was the plane flying, and you told us where the crash site was, but what was its direction at the time it landed? Can you tell us that?
I have no idea. I just don't know yet.
Your boss told us earlier that it did not have a CVR or an FDR
It
on
did.
this. It did not.
Then I have got to, I've got to back off and say if the Air Force has already told you that, it's their aircraft.
Which begs the question, why not?
Well, you're asking me, unfortunately, questions I can't answer.
Report of a survivor, do you have any other details at all as to whether it was a man or woman or a passenger or crew?
Yeah. I don't, and I don't want to speculate at this time, and again, because it's an unconfirmed report. I wish I could confirm this were true, but I can't do it standing here today. We just don't have that kind of information. I have given you everything that I know of in terms of unconfirmed reports because you have a right to know what we are hearing as unconfirmed reports. As soon as these things can be confirmed, it'll be made available to you.
Perhaps you could just clear up. Looking at your command pilot wings, commercial 737s have been having some problems, a couple of crashes last year. Engine failure and/or a jamming of an elevator could throw an aircraft off even that distance. If you say that you're pretty convinced that it's not pilot error, that leaves two things, act of God or mechanical error.
Right.
What's your feeling?
Well, you're asking me to speculate. Don't misread me. I'm not saying it wasn't pilot error. I don't know what it was. That's not my job to stand here a very short time after the accident and try to speculate. It's a big mistake to do that. That's what an accident board is designed to do. Let's wait and see what they come up with.
Do you expect to be able to get search and rescue personnel there tonight?
Absolutely. I think that's a distinct possibility. And if, like I said, it may have happened by now. As soon as we get confirmation, we'll give you updates as we go through the rest of the afternoon.
Problems with the T-43?
We take one more back here.
Have you had problems with the T-43 before, similar to the commercial 737?
Yeah. I don't want to speculate on that because if we have, I personally am unaware of it. I think if there were anything, me being in the position that I'm in and operations in the Joint Staff, I would have been aware of it. But I know of no problems, no reports of any problems with the T-43 aircraft. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Somebody give us a spelling of the two officers that you mentioned?